it doesn't really mean much unless you execute it, unless you can drive value from it, not just internally for your own organization, but for the end customers. And of course, if you can deliver it consistently, at the end of the day, it's the consistency of the experience is where people are going to be loving your product or they will keep going back to it. If they have a few bad experiences, they will not come back to the product. It needs to come from the top. Everybody needs to start into that kind of a model and kind of mindset for it to be delivered as an outcome, which is called a good quality product. It is not just one department that can take care of all the challenges or the burden and can go through the whole burden of managing this. Thank you, Kaden, for having me on the show. My name is Khurram. I'm the founder of Quality System, which is a software testing consulting company, and Quality, which is a test management platform. Also, I have been an investor in startups and happy to be on the show. Would love to see where we can take this show from here.
Um, Can you tell me a little bit more about your background, like what you've done professionally and why and what you do? Like why, like what you
Sure. I
do, and
mean,
then why do you do it?
sure. So I started my career as a professional in software testing, specifically back in 2001. And I really liked the concept of software testing specifically because it's more about thinking how a user thinks about a software and how they use it. And I found it to be more liberating and more creative than writing a piece of code. And that's how I started my journey. I worked for 3 to 4 years and then I decided to set up a business which is just specialized in software testing services because at that point in time, we didn't have iPhone or all these devices, but I could see that a lot of enterprise softwares were not being pushed out properly. And I thought that there is a big space for testing and bringing in specialized skill sets to these enterprises. And that's how we started Qualitative as a concept. What Qualitative has been in business for more than 15 years now. And throughout the journey as a founder, I have had three prime focuses for our business. The first part is the innovation part. So how do we make things faster, better, and keep quality as a prime target for us? The second part is how do we create skill set? I mean, for that we have had institution in our in our organization. We have training mechanisms, and the third part is improving the processes of the organization, not just internally but also for all the customers. And this has led to development of our product now, which is Quality, which is an AI-based test management platform where we have brought in all our skill set, which we have gathered in the last 15 years of serving different customers in different industries and try to reproduce that in a very concise and in an efficient model for any testing team to use and basically test products faster.
I like how I like what you said about how you were drawn towards software testing as more of the motivation was to guarantee that the software is going to deliver on the intended user experience. One of the things that I have been struggling with as a designer and now as a product management lead is the concept of UAT testing. With all the other responsibilities that we have, not to say that like we're the most busy of people, but we do have the most thrashing on our schedules when it comes to meetings and demands from stakeholders and stuff like that. When you're finally shipping, it's getting into like user acceptance testing, where you're testing the software, clicking around in it to make sure that it's working correctly. The head of QA at the current company I work for coached me one time on like how to approach testing and how to like delegate tasks to the QA team and make sure that they understand the exact specifications of the intended user experience so that they could carry most of the heavy lifting and you could just make sure that there's like maybe like reviewing the like the right content and the right flow is working. But the whole purpose of UA function is to do a lot of the heavy lifting
Yeah.
involved there. Like how would you like if you're coaching a product manager, and you can use me as an example because it's my show, so I could get free coaching. How do you reconcile the difference between like user acceptance testing, which is usually a requirement of the product role, and quality assurance testing? And what's the difference, and how would I like conceptualize that part of the process better so that could
So
actually be more helpful.
yeah, so look, I am in a way performing the role of a product manager too these days because the product I've talked about, I'm the one who is leading that product side, right? Now, it's one thing when you're sitting in as a testing team and you look at the problem, and then when you sit like a product manager, you see the issues and the challenges. For example, if you have a, if you have a feature request from an enterprise customer, for example, right, and the priority just goes over there. So as a product manager, your resources are always less. You have to juggle between the features and the testing and then the bug fixing and all of that stuff. So as a product manager, I've understood how testing needs to slightly adjust more towards not just the UAT part, but how they can quickly find those issues. How can they make the process more repeatable and more deeper as well? Because the cost of the bug that a customer reports is just really high now. Your support team gets engaged, developers get engaged. And also what as product managers I've seen, we struggle when we find an issue in through a customer, for example, when you have not done a proper testing lifecycle internally, is that your whole focus of development also shifts with that. So it's very critical that you have a very solid QA process put in place before you even go for UAT in some products. Even if you are doing a unit level testing, that is one way of testing an application. But then you need to have independent people who are not business users. UAT is more also when business users are also testing at the same time. And their time is also very critical. So you need to have some teams in between post development, pre UAT, who have this deeper insight into how the testing as a process has to work. And they can help you identify more issues and, of course, also highlight some of the potential issues that may come up before they go for UAT or before they go to the end user or the business level testing. So I think testing has become more agile now. If I were to compare from when I started to now, I think testing is far more about agility right now. Everybody takes testing as can we save some hours from testing and put them in development? And like, how can we reduce time from testing and add to maybe, again, the development of the design part? So I think testing is getting really less and less time. And that's why I think testing as a unit has to evolve and adapt and grow faster too. And I think that's where, in my opinion, some of the ways in which AI can help are beneficial. Like we still need to see how it turns out eventually. But generally speaking, this is how testing, in my opinion, is going to change and has evolved as well, at both at unit testing level and at the quality level overall.
So let me make sure I understand. Like when you bring in a testing function, it should almost precede UAT because they can capture more errors faster, especially like leveraging automated testing software and stuff like that. So that by the time it's like right about ready to ship, that's when the product manager could come in and do like final like user acceptance testing
Yes.
instead of trying to do it. Like, that I think was
Because
that's been like
let's
my big mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, because let's put dollar value to the time that a product manager or a CTO or a CEO. I speak to a lot of startups and I constantly see the CTOs and the product managers are trying to test the application, right? Now, if you start putting in the dollar value in terms of the time they're spending on testing versus having somebody who is skilled and who is just doing that kind of work and also bringing in the focus, I think if it is a product manager, your focus is diluted between design and the development and the customer support and the customer success then, right? It's always everywhere. And having that kind of specialized focus person doing the thing for you. And then as a product manager, as CTO or CEO, maybe you can come in and evaluate where the product stands. That is definitely a lot of, that's also important for in terms of the cost value, but also in terms of the focus that you get by having that kind of person in the team.
Well, and like this has been my experience because I didn't really understand like this nuance. And I think it's just an indication of like how hard it is to really, no matter how long you've been in the industry, you're always going to have a blind spot
Yeah.
with your cross-disciplinary partners on the value that they add. So my experience has always been that I do UAT in tandem with them, and then I'm like logging like bug tickets, like redundant bug tickets. Like I'm seeing
Yeah.
the same issues, but I'm not
Yeah.
catching at as many because I
Yeah.
may be
Yeah.
doing like two like test runs while they're doing like potentially hundreds.
Yeah.
And then I'm always getting like a comment saying, "Oh yeah, this has already been cataloged in this ticket," and then I'm like, "What's the point of me doing this?"
Yeah.
But there is like a point of like just making sure that hey, there's like a final like fit and finish check at the very end of the process, where you can make that call. And if you have, yeah, it's like it's too many. It's like a too many cooks in the kitchen problem. It's very similar to the tension between designers and PMs during the
Yeah.
design process. It's as I've developed into like more of a product management role in my career. It's always been the challenge of making sure that you're not like in tandem doing the same thing and like creating redundancies.
Yeah. And also, one more thing is not just the redundancy part. I think the other critical aspect is when somebody comes in with a more focus. So, where is software testing more valuable? In my opinion and in my experience, if you cannot trace your test cases to, for example, your user stories, and you see there are missing links, that testing is an incomplete testing. At the very heart of software testing is, in my opinion, the most important concept is traceability. You should be able to establish traceability between each and every business need, business requirement, or user story to your test cases. And hence, and only then you will know if you have executed your testing properly or not. Without the thoroughness, to be honest, testing is pretty useless in my opinion. You will always have bugs which will be pushed out. You will think that you are testing. Basically, it's not really the right way of doing testing. And at the end of the day, you will have struggle with your customers. You will struggle with your developers. Developers will feel frustrated, to be honest, if the testing is not done properly, and also customers will feel frustrated. So again, it's very critical to look at testing as a function, which is a very critical part of your development lifecycle, and you cannot ignore it. I see a lot of customers who have 15 developers or 20 developers, but they have one or two QA guys. And testing is far more complicated now as well. Now you're talking about a mobile app and it needs to be tested on iPhones and Androids. And then you have a web application and then you have 4 or 5 browsers on which it needs to be tested. So you need to have that kind of bandwidth in the testing team to test it, and then that kind of methodology and process to test it. So it's, in my understanding, is still people work like that, but I think we're more complicated than just allocating a few hours and doing it at the last moment or not giving it resources.
So, how do you think this came to be? Like, where the ratio has always been heavily weighted towards engineering and development, people that could ship
Yeah.
features,
Yeah.
and then oh yeah, we'll hire a couple of QA people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Like,
primarily
how do you
it's
think that came to be?
sorry, I think primarily it's because there is pressure from the investors and even the market sometimes to push more features. And everybody thinks that they need to roll out more and more features. And hence, if I have, let's say, $100, right? And I know that in those $100, I can get 10 developers, let's say, right? So I would just try to figure out a way to do or to use those $100 for 10 developers. I would not want to add a QA guy. That's how typically people think. They only start thinking about QA when they go through the first release and the customers come back to them with some defect. And then they start incorporating testing as a process into their development lifeline, development process. And I think that's where a lot of people have been working in this fashion. And I think this is changing now because every product has a competition and it's a stiff competition now. And you can't roll out a buggy product and you can't expect people to be using those products anymore. And hence it's important.
When I interviewed one of the VPs of design at American Express, he talked about the big bet that they made on the American Express mobile app
Okay.
with future generations in mind. It was designed around Gen Z because they knew that Gen Zers didn't like talking to people and that they put a certain level of care into the mobile app experience because they knew that in the future, all their current customers who are used to talking to people and inconvenience would be gone. And there'd be this new generation of people in the workforce that expected more from their software. And I always like connecting what other guests are saying. The quality is becoming more and more important. I'm starting to see a trend where, and I think it's a good trend, that in the past it was use most of your budget on engineers, product managers, and then you maybe have a couple QA people and then a couple designers that serve 10 product managers.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to use that Steve Jobs quote from Lost interview. which if the listener hasn't seen that, I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen the last interview? I think the clips are everywhere, but it's when he was CEO of Next, and he was talking about how there's this disease in corporate America, and he talked about how John Scully had this disease that think the idea is 90% of the work, thinking that the
Yeah.
idea is 90% of the work. And when you think that, then it's like, what do? You hire a bunch of ideas people, product
Yeah.
managers, and then you just need a bunch of engineers to execute the ideas. And you've already done the work. You're super smart.
Yeah.
And now I'm seeing that the failure rate for startups is so bad that people are starting to realize that ideas don't matter.
Yeah.
It's just an idea. And
Yeah.
how
I
you
agree.
execute it, the design, and how it works. Quality matters
Yeah.
and more. Or I hope so. I think a lot of people are coming to this realization.
On Steve Jobs, there is another video in which he says that if you look at corporate America's ads, we talk about we are very good quality and quality for this and quality for that. But he says if you ask anybody in US who has the best electronics, they will talk about Japan. But Sony doesn't really put any quality word in their ads. But we know that these products are of good quality, and it's because we use them, right? And we have great experiences with them. And I think that ties back into this whole idea that just because you have you have figured out some business opportunity, some idea, some model, it doesn't really mean much unless you execute it, unless you can drive value from it, not just internally for your own organization, but for the end customers. And of course, if you can deliver it consistently, at the end of the day, it's the consistency of the experience is where people are going to be loving your product or they will keep going back to it. If they have a few bad experiences, they will not come back to your product.
Yeah. And I think that's the reframe is that when we think about quality, if you ask like a typical like product marketing person or an engineer what quality is, they're going to be like, oh, it has the best architecture and
Yeah.
like it's well engineered. It's like the Zune, right? The Zune was very
Yeah.
high quality from an engineering, very well engineered. But to look how like Steve job like in that clip that you just mentioned, quality sounds the customer is the judge on
Yeah.
quality. The
Yeah.
market is
Yeah.
the judge on quality because quality means you consistently meet the customer
Yeah.
promise, like the expectation that was set with the customer. That's what
Yeah.
quality means. And
Absolutely.
you can use Airtable and
Yeah.
Zapier automations to deliver on that promise. Technically.
I know, absolutely. Absolutely. Even if we look at the real life experiences, I know we're talking about technology and everything around software testing, etc. But if you look at F&B business, so if you go to a restaurant and they don't offer you same taste, same flavor, same quality of the output every single time, you will not go there. So quality is already something that even at the software level, we have to make sure that it's ingrained in our system. It needs to be part of our product development. It needs to be part of the whole organization, right? Just one developer, one team cannot pull the whole quality mindset in the organization. So it needs to come from the top. Everybody needs to start into that kind of a model and kind of mindset for it to be delivered as an outcome, which is called a good quality product. It is not just one department that can take care of all the challenges or the burden and can go through the whole burden of managing this.
Yeah. And how do you get that outcome? That's what I've learned. Because I've been very critical of the product management job family on this
Hmm.
podcast. I've gone on the record. I could be
Hmm.
seen as a hypocrite for just finally giving in to people saying, "Why don't you product manage?" Why don't you want to be a product manager? And I've actually had basically these existential discussions with some past guests. They're like, "Wait, why don't you want to do this?" And I think it was always just thinking that like all the I'm like, we don't need more ideas people. But what I realized is that holding the line on quality, like the job of product manager is actually not to define the ideas, but to define what good looks like, what a good outcome looks like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that there's this vision that the team can rally around. Because then
Yeah.
an engineer is going to know that, oh, like my technical design, this isn't good enough because this isn't going to help us reach the outcome that's been defined and that we aligned on. And then QA is going to be a lot more critical in the
I
testing
agree.
process because they're like, no, this isn't good enough. It's not working. I
Yeah,
don't care
yeah,
if it's 80% there. 80% is not good enough for the customer for this outcome.
yeah, yeah. And I think as a QA, as a QA, the responsibility is also on us to educate the product managers. If we think there are, let's say, a few issues that we have spotted, and I don't want to use the word issues here as well. I'm even adding some suggestions or some ideas that we have in our head because we have seen some other application doing it better. And we can advise the product team that, look, there is a better way of doing something this way. I think QA needs to step out of the game of just finding defects and reporting them and be more on the table in terms of floating in suggestions and ideas on how to improve overall experience of the end user. So when the product manager sets a vision, I think that also needs to be accepted, understood, and built. And then QA needs to further build on that as well. And because QA will have its own very interesting angle and tangent of seeing multiple applications, seeing how different users behave, and then also need to stand in the shoes of the end user and then so-called test it properly in that sense as well. So I think QA team has a very critical role in terms of shaping up this product management's vision of how the product needs to work.
Could you walk me through a time where QA reframed the problem? An example for maybe with your client work or anything like that, where the requirements and the designs and the technical design started out one way, but then when QA got involved, it led to a reframe.
Yeah, so I think there was this startup and this back like 6, 7 years ago when I was actively looking at each and every customer that was coming our way. And this was more like a hands-on experience that I had. They came to us with the problem that their application is not responding, right? And so they came to us with the problem that we have some customers reporting us that our application is slow. When we started testing, we figured out that this is a potential problem of performance. Now, the interesting bit with performance testing is that performance can be an issue of the software and it can be an issue of the hardware. It can be an issue of the middleware as well, right? So we had to isolate the problem from hardware and we figured out the problem is actually in the software right now. And when we dug deep, I still remember that for that application, we also went through the code review exercise because we figured out that this is a software level problem. And in the code review, we figured out that there is a problem with the architecture of the application. And we can keep fixing it and we can spend as much time as we want, but this is not going to result in any net improvement like down the road. As your application is growing, it's becoming more and more complex. You have more and more users coming in. So you need to figure out the infrastructure, the architecture level of that. That is one particular case where I clearly remember that we advised the customer that you probably need to build a parallel team and look at the architecture of the application and maybe start working on some other architecture than what you're using right now. So that is one example that I have absolutely never forgotten because it started as a problem statement of users not happy with my product to figuring out that it's also an architecture issue.
Wow, yeah, I found that as well from like the design lens. Very similar. I would be proposing designs, but the architecture didn't support
Yes, yes.
the
I
the
know what you
business
mean.
object model. Yeah,
Yeah,
and the engineers would just say, "Oh, that like the system doesn't work that way, so we
yeah,
can't do it." And it's then the system's wrong
yeah,
because the customer's trying to do this.
yeah,
And that triggered a lot of replatform or like re-architecture projects, or maybe the code base is it's really hard to recruit for, right? Like talent's a quality issue, right? It's not
yeah,
always the
yeah.
software, right? Like you could diagnose that, oh, you actually don't have the right people on the bus to execute this level of quality. Has that ever happened
No.
before in your career?
Nothing that I can think of right now, but I like your point of the desires coming to the developers and developers saying, no, it cannot be done. I've seen that kind of a challenge happening quite often. Even as a testing team, sometimes we go back to developers and we tell them, listen, this is going to cause this kind of an issue. And they were like, we are stuck with the technology, can't really do much. Sometimes some of these defects are accepted as a limitation of technology or limitation to limitation, right? So you close those bugs and you say it's a tool limitation and you accept it. But as I had a similar challenge with my product where I had a designer and she told me that this is how the flow should work. And then I went to my developers and they were like, listen, we can't really implement this. And I was like, hang on, but I want this one to be implemented. I don't want to listen to this, that you can't have the technology for this. Just figure out a way to how can we make it happen. And I think sometimes when developers are saying that, and I'm not really necessarily criticizing developers here, I'm just saying generally because the push from designers and also from the testers. So their normal reaction is this cannot be done, or this is the technology and this is how it is supposed to be, etc., etc. And sometimes all you have to do is ask them to detach from the development and the technology and just think like a user and think, is it going to make their life easier or simpler? And I think then they figure out sometimes how it can be done. So like you mentioned, the designer conversation, this is a similar conversation with developers, with testers have with developers as well.
Yeah, I've seen so many Slack conversations where the QA person just gets like sidelined with the engineers. Yeah, I don't really see it. Well, yeah, just completely sidelined. I don't see that. Design have a lot in common where it's just by default because the engineer controls the code base that it could just veto you.
Yeah.
What I've realized, and the question that I've been asking engineers more when we get into this conversation where they suddenly lose all of their imagination that they developed in their CS degree on the limitations of technology when you're asking for what really is a simple CRUD action, a very proven technology, some forms, inputs, etc. Is I ask them, is this an appetite problem or a confidence problem? And it's if they're like, no, like I'm sure it's technically possible, and I have some ways that we could do it. Then it's okay. Then it's an appetite problem. Maybe how I explained the problem didn't really spark a lot of appetite for you to solve it, and so then we should probably just talk it out. And then it either is like at the end of the day, it's my fault either way. One, it's a bad framing of the problem, and we find that out through discussion. Oh, actually, engineer, you're right. This isn't worth doing. And then, or two, I miscommunicated it.
Yeah. So I think communication is the most important thing. So see, if I were to draw parallels here in testing, for example, if you have logged a defect, you found an issue in the application and you have not been able to write it properly, and you cannot help developers, for example, reproduce the same issue, becomes a bit of a waste of time for developers specifically. And it's again boils down to the communication problem because the tester is not communicating effectively or in the right manner, or not writing enough detail for the developers to reproduce that issue. So this is what I tell my team members, that as a testing team in any project, no matter what the size of the customer is and who the customer is, we have to be very transparent with communication. Because without communication, one, you're not able to enable them to understand what the problem is. But two, you are also making them think about things that are not even there. So the whole energy is wasted on stuff that is not supposed to be even looked at in the first place. And there is this problem and there is this challenge of communication between testing teams and development teams. And I agree with you 100% on this one, that sometimes it is the communication problem.
Now that you said that, it makes me think that QA, and I've definitely been guilty of this recently, is like whenever I have friction with QA partner, it's because I feel like they're being nitpicky about something where they're just like, no, this doesn't work. Like they block the launch or something like that. But the mistake here is that they're not brought in early enough. Who on the team has the least amount of context? It's not in the early discussions about what problem we're trying to solve and looking at prototypes and doing functional prototyping with live data. Does QA, do you try to have your employees, is it a thing to have QA functional prototypes or live data prototypes?
I think if you bring in QA early, this is the best thing you could do for your own product. The earlier you engage them. So let me take a step back. Let's not think QA as a technical software engineer. Let's think of this person as somebody who is going to look at your application like an end user. Okay, so this guy can be your beta user. It can be your friend who is supposed to test your application. Will use your application. Let's not even use the word test here. This person is going to use your application. If you don't bring this guy up to the speed on what the product is supposed to do, and you don't give them enough time and enough understanding of how the product is supposed to work as a user, they cannot really look into this application and give you any valuable feedback. They may be able to tell you this form is not working, this field is not working, my submit button is not working, but that even a CTO can figure out. I think if you want really to drive value from QA teams, you have to bring them at very early stage when you're defining your user stories and when you're thinking of, okay, what kind of business challenges I'm trying to solve through this product. And the earlier they understand, the better test cases they can write, the better traceability they can bring into your application testing lifecycle. And hence you can find defects much more earlier. And for one of the customers, it was a banking customer. So we did an exercise. We figured out how many bugs were coming into the digital banking app. We figured out if when they brought us in early into and we had to actually present them the case that your idea of bringing us is actually not helping you guys. We figured out that we could stop 33% of the defects at the development level before they are even ready for testing if they have used us in the requirement stage. So then we are able to write much more test cases, and we are ready with the test cases. And when developers have just have gotten done with the application development process, we can instantly do some instant scanning of the tests of the application, and we can say, oh, you know what, this is failing at these 5 points. Maybe we need to fix this now, or maybe we can go for the full blown testing lifecycle. So I think this is very critical for no matter what the scale of the organization is to bring testing early, because think of them as your business users. They're going to look at your business idea, potentially think of every other way a user can use this application, and then document that. And based on that documentation, they can run either automated or manual scripts.
Yeah, the parallel I see in like the video game industry is that they have actual like testers that like play
Games.
So that's seen like anyone that's seen like Mythic Quest, like the Apple TV show, they have these two characters that just basically they're paid to play the video game, and then they have the technical expertise to diagnose potential problems and log tickets as they play the game.
Yeah.
And the reframe there is that they're playing the game.
Yeah.
Right. Just like a QA engineer, like they are a very technical role. Like they need to understand and be able to diagnose like what's happening when it does break. But they really are like a beta user. And if they can't get into the role of, because what does a video game do? It's escapism. You're trying to pretend to be something else. You're playing God of War, like you're the God of War in that game. Like you have to get into character and get immersed in it. And all you're saying is like, hey, here's this game. I'm not going to give you a lot of context on it, and I want you to play it. And you can't like at least pretend that like you're into this type of genre of game. And get into that mindset of what they're trying to do. Then how do you, like, what else can you do? You just point out everything that's wrong with it. Yeah, this button doesn't work. Oh, the border radius is off by this many pixels, because it's like, well, I need to justify my position, and you're not giving me a lot to work with, not a lot of direction on like how to test this thing. Yeah.
But what if the same guy comes to you and says, listen, I have played this game, and this is how probably you can improve this game. See, that is a value problem. That is not a cost problem then. So QA shift, in my opinion, from a cost center to a value center the moment you start thinking of QA as not just somebody finding me issues. It's can they help me improve the product in terms of the usage, in terms of the way it comes across to an end user. And suddenly you don't see QA anymore as I'm spending like hundreds of thousands of dollars on QA. You think of, oh, I am helping my sales team generate more dollars because my product is loved by my end users. And there is a significant chunk of that thing that comes in from the QA side. And it should come from the QA side also. It shouldn't be just about logging in defects.
Yeah, because QA and QA people, they use the software, their customers to other people's software, and they live around
Mhm.
software every day.
Mhm.
Doesn't you're implying that there's an element of taste, like that there should be some level of like product sense of what a good product is at the QA level, and they're looking at it through the lens of the user, right? And I think everyone, in a certain sense, everyone's like looking at everything through the lens of a user, but when it comes to QA, it's I didn't design this.
Mhm.
And so I have to look at it through the lens of I don't have a lot of control over the outcomes, and this is what I don't like about it. And like a new wrinkle in my brain. So like, how do I like involve them more? How do I like approach QA?
I told somebody that for me, a QA person is somebody that if you share a requirement, for you share a user story, the developer will think, oh, I need to implement this user story and I have to write the code this way. But a tester needs to think of everything around that user story. What is not written in that user story is what a tester has to think about, because that is potentially how a user will use an application eventually. Most of the times you must have seen in your product that you may release a feature intending it to be used in a certain way, and when it gets to the customer, they start using it something else. They use it completely different way, right? Now, I think that is also where a QA person can be very helpful and very beneficial, because they have to think of these other scenarios in which an application or a feature can be potentially used. And again, I think one aspect is that you bring them very early on into your development lifecycle. The second one is you give them the most amount of information that you need. Sometimes it's good to give them more information than less information. You're right about nitpicking part, because I think QA guys have this problem. So I
I
think
get you.
QA guys have this problem of if they don't report everything, then the team say, oh, you didn't report this. And if they over report, then people say, oh, you are wasting your time because we have to filter out all the unnecessary stuff. So I think come back to your question, like the first part is to bring them early into the life cycle. Two is to impart them more and more domain knowledge. And third is to see how you can create better training mechanisms as well in house, because testing is also evolving constantly, right? We're talking about different types of tools, but that's one part, but also how do you use those tools to become more and more efficient in terms of a testing team? Can you reduce as a testing team? Can you help your product team by reducing your testing cycles? So, for example, maybe in one sprint it's taking you 25 hours to test an application. How can you optimize that to bring it to probably 20 hours, right? Maybe you bring a mix of automation and the functional testing, or maybe use a library of test cases. So I think as the testing, through these two or three mechanisms, you can make your testing function in the product much more efficient and also much more robust. And again, like in my experience, testing will never have enough time. They will always be not getting enough hours to do it properly. And that's why it becomes even more critical if they have more and more time upfront when there is no crunch. They can take their own time to figure out test cases, and then eventually, when the time is less, they just execute those test cases.
Yeah, there's a book called Learning to Think Strategically, and it walks through the cognitive, like the metacognition of like really great strategic thinkers.
Okay.
And it differentiates between strategic thinking and strategic planning.
Mm-hmm.
Strategic planning is like what they teach in MBA schools. It's all the frameworks and like reductionist thinking to execute a strategy. But there's not a lot of like great strategic thinkers. And so what she does, the author, she interviews all these strategic thinkers that like are well known for coming up with very like novel approaches that
Mm-hmm.
differentiate their companies in the market. And all of them like talk about how they use like metaphor and story, and they talk about like one executive, like a financial executive, talked about how like he compared his business to like his cello practice because he's an amateur cellist.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
she talks about like how do you improve your strategic thinking? First, you differentiate between the planning portion. Strategic thinking is divergent thinking, lateral thinking. It's messy. You need time to explore all the angles,
Mm-hmm.
and then you need to develop kind of like this narrative of what the right approach is to a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into the reductionist thinking of, okay, with current resources, like how do we execute a strategy. And if you are brought in too late, you don't really get a lot of time to think strategically.
Yeah, well,
You
makes
can't
sense.
inform the plan. But could you help me understand how AI has improved things? Like I know that testing automation software, I don't really understand a lot of it. I'm assuming that it has like an agent in the computer do the workflow over and over again to stress
So,
test
I
the
mean,
system. Can you help me understand like what testing software is and yeah.
so see, AI is coming into two, three areas right now. One is the AI agent part that you mentioned, but specifically there are two, three aspects on which you are trying to facilitate a tester. So I tell people that AI can expedite and enable testers to test much more faster than traditionally they have been able to. So, for example, you can now generate test cases based, and AI can help you generate test cases. Now, you don't literally have to write down all the scenarios and all the tests by yourself. You can use tools, and those tools can help you generate test cases faster. So that is a significant. Like we brought this into the feature into our product, and we saw that some of our own testing time was reduced by 23 to 27%, something like that as a number. And the reason was that every user story was able to generate test cases, and then the tester was spending more time on figuring out which of those test cases generated are used for that. So it's more about being more in control of the kind of testing you want to run. And that is, in my opinion, the most important aspect of what AI is doing right now. The other aspect is the test data generation part. So, like a lot of these applications, which are enterprise grade, they have a lot of test data requirements. Now, AI is being used to generate that test data, which, for example, in the case of financial industry, the card numbers and the name, stuff like this. Now you can use AI to generate that kind of test data in bulk and just run your application as if you're running on live production data. And then, of course, you have no code, low code automation tools, and they have been there already. So they are helping you write automated scripts, even if you don't know programming that much. So that they are also facilitating and enabling testers to write automated scripts much more faster. So taking less time. Again, I think everything is just going towards how can we push faster the code, both at development level and the testing level?
So what came first? Your agency, like your service business, or the software
The
that you
agency.
guys developed?
So we started as a
What was
testing
the
company first.
insight and what was the insight that like said, hey, you want to throw a hat in the ring in the SaaS business?
Yeah, as a founder, the one question I'm always asked is why, if somebody wants to work with us, why would they even want to think about working? Why would they even consider us as an option? Services are hard. I know products are hard too, but I'm just saying services are hard in a way that everybody can claim that they are the best in the market, but you only get to experience it once you've used them, right? So how do you stand out, and how do you become, or you come across as a company which has strong expertise, right? So when we were doing a lot of work in the consulting business, we thought one problem that we wanted to address was the consistency of service delivery and the quality of that service delivery. So we have like offices in 5 countries. We wanted that anybody who is sitting in one country gets the same kind of skill set and the service from our vis-a-vis any other country. So for us, that is the problem that we were trying to solve. So we started building this test management tool in-house for our own internal usage. And then down the road, I started feeling that maybe we can start using it we can launch it as a SaaS product. And we found some great attraction. We found customers who were willing to pay for this tool. And we thought, okay, that's it. Maybe we have this now, another area where we can build this product, make it more SaaS ready, make it more outer customer ready. Internal customers are already happy. They were using the product in any case. So we were now then thinking of using it to customers outside. And it's very hard to pivot as a founder from a services to a product mindset. So I spend a lot of my time into understanding how the product works, because services is another beast and the product is another beast. So I spend a lot of my time in understanding where do I need to improve, where do I need to read more, where do I lack as a person. And then I started working more and more as on the product side. And now I'm pretty happy with the fact that we did initiate this one, because I think it's a great experience. Like when you see a product being used by your customers, And sometimes these are funny ways of using the product. You don't have that kind of an experience in a service model at all. Product is that kind of a child that gives you more different kind of flavors, and it helps you see things in a very different way. The same technology industry, same everything else. You just see, okay, people may use this product this way, but they may not use this product the same way too. So for me personally, it is a great journey in that sense. And I'm really glad that we
Well,
made that kind of a switch too.
it makes me think about that every great B2B SaaS the outcome is you're trying to be like Tesla full self-driving, like the self-driving customer.
Yeah.
Could you deliver the same outcome that your service business gave using like well-crafted software? It's very similar to postpaid. People are like talking about, hey, we need MVP, and I'm like, the pros, like my current gig, we're trying to make these like customer facing experiences that had like nothing to do with the operations. And when I came in, it was like, no, this is like a service design problem. Like first figure out how to deliver the service. And then we did a very similar thing where we productized the operations, but like you start with the backstage and you weave in operations into the internal application layer to the platform that you're building.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually it becomes stable. And then it gets to the conclusion of like, why don't we just make a customer facing version of this? Because like we're able to replicate results, and then we create customer facing like application layers that are inputs to this like system already. How
Yeah.
can you start like gradually handing it off to the customer, improving the usability? And we found like a lot of success doing it that way instead of just saying, no, a product, like your job is to ship customer facing value. And it's, yeah, but then I feel like I'm being set up to fail because let's say that there are customer success type roles where
Mm-hmm.
they're used to being in contact via WhatsApp with the customer all the time, and they
Mm-hmm.
disintermediate them from the platform because they're like, oh no, don't use the website. Like, I'll just do it for you. Like, you prevent that by helping the operations team like be part of the platform, like they're a feature of
Yeah.
the platform.
Yeah.
Is this kind of unhappy path admin role in the business model, and then eventually like you get enough like saturation of data to create repeatable outcomes without needing like a human to intervene on the
Mm-hmm.
customer
Mm-hmm.
success side.
Yeah.
And yeah, like the MVP is like the spreadsheets and the operations, and then you
Yeah.
see the pattern, like the game trails, so to speak, in design land, and then you're like, oh, like we could easily automate that process. And then
Yeah.
yeah, like you talked about, like the excitement of like when you're right and
And
you
also
learn
the
and you
excitement
actually
of
like start solving the problems. Yeah.
yeah, and also the it ties back to our original conversation about idea and execution, right? I think that also when you have this aha moment that where you had an idea and you implement that in the product in terms of a feature and you see it working and you see how some of those customers are driving more value from your product because of that specific feature, that is also very exciting about this whole process. It's not just that you have something in your head and it stays in your head. You see it in action and you see how it is improving some sort of value or driving some value from that for the end customers. So it's that is also very exciting for me as an outcome.
And it sounds way less risky to dog food your own systems. And then worst case scenario, it's like you can't find paying customers. You're like, optimize our operations. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you get
No,
worst case
absolutely.
scenario is you're just like, yeah, go.
I think some of the best products that have been built because they were trying to solve their own problems. Somebody was trying to solve a problem that they had seen either happening internally or in their past organization or something like that. I think that is the closest you get to coming up with an idea which has some real tangible outcomes and applications as well. So I think if you have some sort of industry knowledge and if you understand the industry itself, and even if you don't know technology and you're trying to solve that problem, more often than not, you will figure out some customers. And once you figure out those customers, then the whole journey is to pivot, figure out, okay, what more can be done in your product or through your ecosystem of not just the product, but also the customer success. So the support team and through the sales team, how can you improve the experience of your potential customers who are not signed up right now?
Wow. Khurram, I could keep talking about this, but I didn't know that this whole story, this whole interview was basically your story of like how you pivoted into the product role because you were obsessed with making the best QA test, like the software testing service business.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
just happen to find out it just has something to say about obsession, finding a problem to be obsessed with. Yeah,
Yes.
that like
People
the
keep me
best,
up all
like
night.
yeah, but and I imagine it gave you energy too because you're just like, oh, we could probably approach it like this and stuff like that. Yeah, I really admire your articulate responses in this interview, and really what I learned from you today is how the importance of framing and perspective and how QA, bringing the QA perspective into the software development process, like how valuable that is to have real people stress testing the software, even the idea or the prototype of the software early and often
Yeah.
to provide that. That's something that product managers and designers and engineers really don't really have a lot of time to really understand. Do you feel like there's anything that hasn't been said that should be said before we sign off?
I love this conversation and I'm not really able to figure out any other topic. But it's just if I were to conclude, I would say if you're a product manager, if you're a CTO, VP engineering, think of QA or testing as a value. Don't think of it as a cost. Somebody needs to take that heavy lifting for you. And if they can reduce that kind of pressure from you and you can focus more on the customer, and that will help you generate more revenue. That is how you need to think of QA. And at the end of the day, quality is not like I also tell a lot of people I talk to that quality as a concept is not a problem of one department. It is not the responsibility or unless it's the only responsibility of a testing team. It is the problem of everybody in the organization, down to your support guy. So if you want to have a quality output or a quality product, you need to have this kind of thought process built into everybody who is doing whatever in the organization and however they are working to deliver that kind of value for the end customer. So these are the only two things that I thought I just feel like reinforcing because these are some of the common things I see and I hear when people talk about software testing and quality in general.
And if anyone that's listening is interested in engaging you, your company, and their services, or to learn more about your testing software, like how can people find your work?
So they can add me on LinkedIn and we have a website called qualitatum.com. We have our own product, which is at quality.com. And they can, again, they can reach out to me and I'm happy to talk to them directly as well.
Perfect. And, could you? And then I'm assuming LinkedIn is good. Like, how can people find you on LinkedIn? If you could just spell your name out, just for someone like that's listening, I'll make sure to have everything else in the show notes as well. But usually it's helpful to.
Yeah. So I think my LinkedIn profile would be Khurram Mir, Mir. That is my profile name. But I will definitely send you my LinkedIn profile so you can probably tag it or add it into your description.
Absolutely. Perfect.
But I'm
Khurram,
so
thank
glad
you
I spoke
so
to a
much
product
for
guy
taking the time.
about, yeah, I'm excited about this talk because I spoke to a product guy. So there are two perspectives that we were talking about what product guys and product teams typically think and their challenges and where they feel testing is not able to drive. Like the true term is because of testing, you're not able to ship products, basically. And I think it needs to be seen more from the value angle that, okay, if they're stopping this thing from being rolled out, maybe they're saving us a lot of bad press. Maybe they're helping us save bad reputation in terms of customer, how they see our product. And they're also potentially helping us improve the product and generate more revenue and have more happy customers.
Yeah, and like when Lean Startup was written, and like where the
Mm-hmm.
concept of the MVP, where you ship like mediocre software basically just to
Yeah.
get feedback. Like software was a new thing. There wasn't like people were still like buying CDs and downloading it to the computer to like use software. Like software wasn't a dominant force that is today. People
Yeah.
expect quality because there's so much competition, especially like B2B SaaS business where a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
are, I'm sure like you're not the only quality testing
No, no. Yeah.
software
Yeah.
company out
Yeah.
there. Yeah, you have to make a really good first impression. And I, what I'm going to start trying to do and document in my work here is like, how do I make it so that the QA person doesn't feel like they have to be nitpicky, like they know exactly what they're looking for. And I see that as like a success metric of like nitpicky comments about my requirements in the release. Because if you see QA as a blocker, the problem with like, especially product manager listening, like the problem is I hate the term mini CEO, but the implication there is that everything's your fault, even if you don't have control over people or authority. If QA is being nitpicky, it's your fault because they don't know what to look at. They don't know what to evaluate. It's
What
your
is the
fault.
priority? And as a product manager, you must prioritize it for them. You must tell them, look, in terms of priority, these are the features that we need to look at, or these are the kind of things we want to track or figure out first. Of course, QA needs to come back and give their opinion as well. And if you have that kind of a challenge as a product manager, you should know you are much more better off a QA person giving you 2 bugs more than a customer sending you even 1 bug, because that is a far bigger cost at the end of the day than getting few more bugs from the QA teams. So I think, again, look at it from that angle. That is more critical, in my opinion, for the whole success of the product and its team as well.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show. You have a good one.
Thank you so much.
Hey listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.